Hi, Dr. Versalotti here, and in this screencast we're going to talk a little bit about phonology and L2 language performance. Specifically, when learners learning a new language, an emergent bilingual speaks in the target language. So let's first review a little bit about L1 phonology. How do we learn the phonology of our first language? Well, we learn it from lots and lots of input, and we learn these phonological patterns from this input very early. I'm not saying that a 2.5-year-old could explain the phonological patterns, of course. They don't have the words to do that, but because of the input that they've heard, they've started to realize which sound changes matter because there's a resulting difference in meaning and which sound changes do not matter. For instance, you could play a game with a child as young as 2 and say, point to the key and versus point to the T, and they could hear that sound difference and know that that difference is important. There's a difference in meaning in English. Key versus T is a difference in place of articulation, but that's the same for any of the features of articulation. Voicing, pat versus bat. Now, these patterns are part of our procedural knowledge of the language. We know how to do it in our first language or any language that we're highly proficient in. But because it's largely beneath our level of consciousness, because we're not actively thinking about these patterns, it's very difficult to stop applying these, especially when we're trying to speak in another language that has a different has different phonological patterns, because we're not we don't think about it, and it takes a lot of effort to think about it and to apply the new patterns. So let's look at some examples. So in English, English has two very weird sounds, the voiceless interdental fricative th and the voiced interdental fricative v. And because those sounds are weird, sometimes speakers substitute different sounds. So instead of th, we might say f, which is very close, or we might substitute th for s, like instead of think, sink, or we might even substitute th for t, like instead of thank, tank. And the same similar substitutions could be made with the voiceless. Instead of the, we might say v or z or d, d answer. Now, the important thing to realize is that those substitutions are systematic. There's a reason why the voiceless interdental fricative might be pronounced as the voiceless labiodental fricative, right? It's not just random sounds being substituted. They're close sounds that are in some way easier for the speaker to make. Now, because when I say that the substitutions are systematic, and not random, that's one point. But that doesn't mean that when we're speaking in a language that our performance will be exactly the same. In our L1, but especially in our L2, right? We might say that sound correctly sometimes, in some places, in some words, and not in others. So performance may vary, but the substitutions themselves would not be just random. There's a difference. So let's look at another part of this. In some languages, the speakers prefer that the syllables be open, so no consonant in coda position. So there's an onset, which is a consonant, and the nucleus, which is a vowel. For instance, I have a colleague with the name Yasuhiru. Every syllable is consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. There's also, words like sushi, consonant, vowel. Now keep in mind, we're not talking about spelling, we're talking about sound. So even in a word like sushi, the sh sound is one sound, even though in English we represent that with two letters. We're focusing on sound. But there are also some languages only allow some sounds in coda position. So generally they prefer open, but some sounds are okay. For instance, maybe nasals. Like I'm thinking of the word bonsai. The n sound is allowed to be in this coda position. That consonant is allowed to be there, but only nasals, for instance. Now, English also has lots and lots of open syllables, right? I, he, she, may, be, you, right? There's lots of open syllables, but English also allows consonants of all types in coda positions, like walk, seize, join, right? Lots of them. And English even allows multiple consonants in coda position, like the example walked. So we have the kt, three, that syllable, it's only one syllable, but it's ending in three consonant sounds. So that can be difficult for learners who have had lots and lots of input of syllables being consonant vowel or consonant vowel and maybe a nasal. So this is a phonological pattern that it might be difficult to not apply when learning a new language. This is something to think about when we listen to learner language and the patterns that we might be hearing. So it can cause maybe some difficulty in understanding and comprehending meaning, but I want to take a special, I want to look a little more in depth at these examples. For instance, let's say the word, I see a dog or whatever. So I see. So the learner can, if their first language prefers open syllables, the word see is fine because that is an open syllable. But if the sentence is she sees with a z sound at the end, that might be, that is in violation of this pattern of open syllables. There's a consonant that's not a nasal there. So we might predict that some speakers might have more trouble allowing that consonant to show up in coda position. If we think about the past tense of the verb see, it's saw, which is again another open syllable. So phonology wouldn't be interfering with application of that irregular past tense. But let's look at these regular past tense, like walked. So having three consonants in coda position is it can be difficult if your tongue's not used to moving that way, if you're used to having vowels to break up those consonants. So walked, right? You might want to insert a vowel in there so that there aren't so many consonant clusters. We see this in L1 and also L2 learning. So it's the phonological patterns of a learner's L1 can have an influence on the language performance when speaking in an L2. And we call this an accent, but I want to caution us that it might also look like errors sometimes. So we have to think, how can we decide if what might be driving this air quotes error in performance? Might we consider the phonology, or is it an issue with the declarative knowledge, or the ability to apply that declarative knowledge when we hear something that doesn't quite match what we would expect in the target language?